Flower friends, welcome back to another episode of the Field and Garden Podcast. It is your friend in flowers, Lisa, and friends, we are kicking it back years. I had something happen here at home that I thought, why don't I share that on a podcast? Folks just starting out might benefit from this. So before we jump into that, I want to just thank you for choosing to take a listen, because I know you have a whole lot of choices out there. And just to remind you that this broadcast is made possible by thegardenersworkshop.com. That is my online platform that is home base to everything that I do and have for you. And that is our mission, is everything we do at the Gardener's Workshop is for you. What you're going to find over there, friends, is endless resources, blogs. You can connect with our other podcasts, Seed Talk. We have so many videos. You can also just jump in head first. We have our live gardening show, our online store. We have a full library of online courses. If you're getting the gist of what I'm saying, we just have a lot of stuff over there. And all of it is to aim you at becoming a better gardener and or farmer and equipping you to do that. You'll find tools, seeds, supplies, my books, everything over at thegardenersworkshop.com. And I recommend that you subscribe to our newsletter, because that's what will keep you in the loop of new things coming down the pike. And my friends, this next year is so full of good new stuff. I have to list it on my notes that guide my days, because there's so many things and you don't want to miss them. So thegardenersworkshop.com is where you're going to find it all. So what's going on here at my house? So you may have heard in the past me mention that Steve, my husband, retired actually December a year ago. And he retired from a very successful family business. And so, you can only imagine how our life has changed. Now, what you have to know is the day after he retired, he went back to work part-time. Thank goodness, right? Because the man is an entrepreneur just like me. It's like you don't just go home and sit idle. So he went back to work part-time, and that has worked out great, because the next generation of Zieglers are starting to lead that company, which is a good thing for all of us. And they love having him there, and he has a reason to help them, right? So he is back at work part-time, and what that means is that he gets to willy-dilly around. I mean, he works in the morning and then, messes around in the afternoon, works on his Harleys. He's restoring his original 68 Harley, and it's good. So one of the things that has come out of that is he has really rekindled some friendships that have been throughout his life. I mean, all through his young adult. But then you know how it is when life gets busy. You see him on the road and beat, but you don't really have time together. Well, he's been able to reconnect with a couple of people. And one of them is somebody, I know them all too, is a friend that he and his wife have a beautiful place on the water. And Stevie came home last week and said that his friend Ron would like to plant some sunflowers. And I thought, really? You know what I mean? Sometimes it's surprising, and it's a reminder to me that I believe that every human really has a natural desire to grow plants. I mean, the miracle of the whole way it happens is it just restores you, right? So I said, well, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, he lives on the river, deer country, It's wooded, but there is some sunny spots. And I said, okay, so what does he think? I mean, what does he think he's doing? And Steve goes into this, I couldn't believe it, this dissertation of how he was coaching Ron on growing this little garden. Oh my gosh, y'all, I just couldn't believe it. It was like full circle, right? I mean, he and I have never had this conversation before. So he said that Ron would like to plant some sunflowers out around where their pond is, which is out in full sun, and they can view it from their deck in their home. And so this whole conversation has begun now about how he can do this and do it successfully. And, just talking about out of the blue, Stevie will say, So how long do sunflowers last in the garden? He asked me that this morning. I was just totally floored. Anyway, it just reminded me of how much information of how to do this, start a little garden as a newbie, is in my mind, but it's not always apparent to people of how to actually do it just starting out. So I thought that I would share the basics of the top 5 cutting garden, getting started tips. And we're not talking about how to start seeds here and actually even what to grow maybe, but it's like, where do you start? Because that's really where my conversation with Stevie started. It's like, yes, he was a vegetable gardener, one of the reasons that, I was attracted to him, and then one of many reasons, but it's totally different helping somebody that knows nothing about gardening. Gardening is not like landscaping at all, right? Those of you that are gardening and growing flowers already, it's like, wasn't that the biggest wake-up call? What do you mean you plant them so much close together and that they have to be in full sun? Anyway, so I thought that I would give you 5 tips, and because I have realized that the setup and the timing of doing the steps of gardening affects the life of your garden, like how much work it is, how well the flowers grow, and just all of that leads to your enjoyment. Is it like you pull in the driveway and go, ugh, there's that garden again, it's full of weeds and I just don't even want to go over there. That happens a lot. Usually midsummer is when that curse falls on you, right? But it affects not only those things, but also how many flowers you get, right? The success or the failure of your garden. And I want to just give this one little example, I'm hoping to spur your interest in maybe learning more of going down the simple, basic steps, through those steps, because of how much it changes the outcome of your garden. So here's just a great example. Did you know that the timing of when you plant trees, shrubs, and perennials can make or break their life? And so what I'm talking about is, first off, trees, shrubs, and plants that survive winter where you are, the stuff that you plant like in your landscape, they're ones that survive winter, right? Well, the best time to plant those, to give them the very best start in life, is in the fall. And why is that? And it is because when you plant them in the fall at your local nursery can hook you up when that time is. When you plant them in the fall, you plant them and they immediately start just laying their foundation. They grow roots. Versus if you wait, and this is what the lion's share of people do, y'all. When we see cherry trees blooming, people rush to the nursery to get them in spring, which is the worst time in the world to plant them. And it's because if you plant the same tree in the spring that you should have planted in the fall, you plant that tree, but instead of just building roots, growing roots, getting your bearings, nesting basically underground, he has to, start growing roots. Whoops, now it's time for me to start also growing leaves, growing up, and guess what else? It is hot and the heat is coming and it's humid, and guess who else is getting active? All the pests. All of a sudden you plant this brand new plant in the ground that's facing all these troubles. And I can't even remember where I was. It was a horticulture professor from Virginia Tech that I was somewhere at a conference. And that's where I learned this way back when. She was explaining that by simply planting at the proper time, the fall, for trees, shrubs, and anything that survives winter in your area. And this was also what was really cooking up cool flowers in my mind. It contributed. By planting in the fall, a plant can lay its foundation to face anything months later. Versus when you spring plant that survives. It never is allowed to build a foundation. It never has time. It never has the energy. It never has the resources to build a rock solid foundation. And what she went on to explain is that those plants, like 80% of them ultimately end up dying a slow death. And when I say slow, with trees and shrubs, it can be years. And it's not because they're just dying a slow death. It is because they can't face the elements and the pressure of the environment. They get diseases, or they get pests, or a drought comes. And that's a really great example, especially with perennials. A drought comes at the end of the summer after that spring you planted it, and it just doesn't have the gas to get through. That is an example of why timing is so blasting important. And there's several tasks and pieces of growing a garden that fall into this. So the bottom line is, by just simply planting a tree, shrub, or perennial in the fall instead of in spring, you almost completely ensure that your plant will survive. And I might add, without much intervention from you. Because what does it do more during the winter? Rain, snow, and ice. That waters your plant, y'all. I mean, it's like the way it was meant to be, okay? So the other one I want to just share, and then I'm actually going to give you the 5 pieces I think that are just great tips, is stuff like, did you know if you plant a warm season tender annual too early, they're going to struggle and be stressed and just not do well? And it's the very same thing for cool season. So for warm, people tend to want to start them and plant them when it's still too cool outside in spring. And that leads to the same problems I just described in unestablished plants from above, the plants, trees, and shrubs. And the very same thing happens when you plant cool season, AKA cool flowers, too late. They don't have time to get established in their preferred cool conditions before they have to, pay the piper, before they have to perform, and they aren't ready yet. It's just so simple that most of us just miss it. So if you want to ensure your success, here are just some of the general tips. I'm going to try not to go deep because I want this to be a quick listen so that you can understand that this is just this applies to all areas of gardening, not just a cutting garden. So here are my 5 areas to think about, to think through before you start planning and planting out in the garden. Number 1, y'all, is choosing the right location for your garden. The number 1 thing to consider is, does it get enough sun? As I'm working on another project, I'm at the point where I was talking about planting, bringing my shade garden from my previous home to this new home that we're in 30 years ago, and how there was only one place that I could put these hellebores because they need to be in deep shade. I'd already learned this lesson, that makes or breaks the plant. You have to know what is it I'm planting. Am I planting a shade garden, a cutting garden, a vegetable garden? And then you have to figure out, okay, what is that garden's needs? If you want to plant a cutting garden, I get this question a lot, and I understand where people are coming from. I came from a deep shade garden. I understand that whole struggle and the reasoning behind. They'll say, from the Cut Flower Handbook or even from Cool Flowers, they'll say, can I plant XYZ? My yard is pretty shady, but I have a spot that gets like morning sun. And so here's the bottom line. There's 2 ways you can approach this. You could technically, of course, you can plant anything anywhere. But is it gonna thrive? No. You could either plant in that condition that's not quite right, and then you're gonna struggle, the plant's gonna struggle, it's gonna be a long, hard road of, my plant just doesn't bloom as often or rebloom, or it's getting mildew, or it's just struggling is what that's all saying. Or you can say to yourself, you know what? There's gotta be a way I can carve out a sunny spot in this shady yard. I mean, y'all, we are so afraid to limb up trees. Limbing up means removing limbs that are closer to the ground to lift the canopy to let more sunlight in. Or most yards have trees planted way too close. They are not happy and healthy themselves. There's just To me, that's like, okay, how do I make more sun if I want to grow a sun garden? It's just so important. And then the other thing to think about is your soil quality. I've often mentioned to people, because I've done it several times now, you know, if you are just starting out and have a really challenging soil situation, whether it's clay or sand or just doesn't drain really well. I'm not talking about a place where water stands. I'm talking about a garden that just doesn't have great drainage. I mean, the water, it just takes it too long to dry out after a rain. I have built so many little raised beds out of going and buying bales of potting soil and compost separately, and then you mix them together and make your bed out of this amazing soil on top of your soil. And that actually helps to enhance the soil it's sitting on, so that 2 years from now you'll have like the best cheesecake you ever ate, right? Plant in, but you have to think about what is the state of the soil where I want to plant. And that is just so important. Drainage is key for soil quality. If you have great soil, let's say you built a great soil, you mix soil and built a bed. If water stands where your bed is, that soil is not going to stay great very long. I mean, disease starts happening, y'all, is what happens. So your soil quality is directly related to the drainage of the soil. And you know, a garden fork, which is really a part of my story too, my life story, finding Steve's grandpa's garden fork. And if you don't know what that is, you can go to thegardenersworkshop.com and go to our tools. We have a garden spade and fork that I absolutely love. That garden fork is like a serious heavy-duty pitchfork. And you're not digging out soil that's got poor drainage. You're poking holes in it and cracking it to open and loosen it up as you add compost to it. There are definitely little baby steps. Nobody starts with great soil, typically, y'all. And it's a lifelong journey. You don't do one thing and poof, your soil is great. It's like doing a little bit that you're physically able to do over time. And each time you plant your little garden, it gets better and better. So your soil quality, we always recommend late summer soil test in whatever you're growing. Your big garden, your little garden, whatever. If you have different areas in your yard, then you need to do one for each. I mean, they're like $10 or something. Your local extension office has the kits for you to fill with full instructions to do that. You gotta know, I mean, would you bake a cake without having a recipe? You wouldn't just dump in stuff, right? And that's what most people do in gardening. They just think, oh, I'll add more organic this. Oh, that's organic, I'll put that in too. You're like doing a science experiment. So where you locate your garden for sun, what is full blasting sun? To me, that is 8 to 12 hours. I mean, that's the truth. You can squeak it below that, but you're not getting, I no longer talk in that language, because it's like, this is what the best case scenario is. And that's what makes your garden stay healthy. And if you're growing a cutting garden and you cut, what constantly keeps those plants reproducing more and more and more and more stems? Full sun, along with these other things, but full sun is where it starts, right? All right, and then the last thing is for site selection and preparation is accessibility. You know, I recommend that if you are planting a little cutting garden, that it be an island, meaning it's not up against a building, a garage, whatever. But not only for maintenance and cutting it, do you want to have full access all the way around. It is a pain in the neck. We actually did an experiment here that it went so badly that we just never really completed the experiment. I planted a cutting garden, the little 3x10 seed collection, up against, started transplants, planted them up against that sweet little building that's in my backyard called the Inn, because there's like 2 3x5 sections on the front of it on either side of the steps. I thought that'd be perfect. Well, y'all, we planted them and they started growing up, but the fact that the sun was blocked for half the day because there's a building right up against it, right? But then when I had to install the plant support netting, I had to do gymnastics to basically access the part of where I had to pound the steak in. And then cutting it was the same thing. So don't do that unless you absolutely have to. And so an island, which means you can walk all the way around it, just makes the whole situation brighter and easier to maintain and easier to actually harvest. So that is, where are you going to put your garden? You have to think about what kind of garden are you planting and what does it need. Top billing, y'all. And then, think about what is the recommended spacing, and, what plant. It's not, when I say companion planting, I'm not talking about planting something next to something to prevent a disease. I am talking about when I'm planting a cutting garden, let's just say a 3x10, I'm thinking, okay, who's the tallest? All right, who's the next tallest? Who is the branchiest, pushiest of them? And you may not know that in the beginning, but you will soon figure it out after you've grown a garden. And guess what, friends? You don't get to figure everything out until you've grown a garden. You have to do it to actually kind of know how it's going to work out. So the number 2 tip is the garden layout and design. And that is not a fancy word, y'all. I'm talking about, think about, all right, I'm growing a vegetable garden or I'm growing a cutting garden. What is the recommended spacing from a reliable source, y'all? Don't just go in and look on a seed packet. Try to get a little bit extra information. And I will tell you that for a cutting garden is so different than just a landscape. We plant so much closer together, because if you think about it, then this is why you need to figure out what you're growing and what does it require. Because with a cutting garden, you literally are pruning that garden hard twice a week all season. It's not like it's growing in a landscape where it grows stems and it stays in the garden and it blooms and looks beautiful and and there's all that foliage and all that. That is not the case with a cutting garden. You are whacking those stems deep and hard twice a week if you want to keep it and treat it like a cutting garden. And then in a cutting garden, of course we use flower support netting. If you have a 3x10 cutting garden, if you look at the seed collection, has a little suggested plan. That plan is based on, the tall ones in the back, and then the next, and then the next, so that it's just easier for you to access it, to harvest, and it just has a better growing environment, right? And as I mentioned, you will definitely create your own opinions of how those should be placed in your garden. Because you want to hear something kind of funny? Do you know that I'm growing the same flowers, the same types, the same varieties of flowers that I started out growing 30 years ago? It's not like you evolved through and growing different flowers all throughout my life. I'm growing those basic quality garden flowers that I started out growing. They just keep getting better and better, and I get better at growing them. We don't get tired of them as cut flowers, y'all, and neither do your customers if you are actually selling. So this whole consider the layout is really about, it impacts your maintenance. The weeding and the watering and the pest control, all of that. What you soon understand, when you do it with consideration in the planning part, it affects how the whole garden actually performs. That brings me to number 3, irrigation and how do you water your plants. So first off, for tall flowers, for cutting gardens, that takes water, y'all. And so part of why people don't water properly is that it's a pain in the neck. You don't have time. You're busy. You don't have time to drag the hose out, and then put it back before the grass gets mowed, all that kind of stuff. So thinking about how are you going to water your garden should be before you plant the garden. And I will mention there are so many different ways and methods of irrigation. I can remember when I first started farming, I was thinking, oh my gosh, thank goodness I married a plumber, because now I can have irrigation, but you don't have to be married to a plumber. You want to hear something? Steve, other than installing the hose bib is like the thing that's on your house that you hook your hose to. other than putting one of those closer to my garden out of convenience because I'm a flower farmer, Steve has basically never touched my irrigation. Y'all, it is so simple and easy when you get the right kind of stuff. And what is the right kind of stuff? It is lay on the ground, drip tape, and drip irrigation. And I'm going to give you the two resources, so grab a pencil, and I'm sure Jesse will put it in the show notes. The two places that I recommend are, if you're on the West Coast, dripworks.com, and if you're on the East Coast, berryhillirrigation.com. The reason I recommend them is I have a lot of experience with both of them, and they have great tutorials and how-tos. But they sell kits. And I mean, you can go in there and find your garden type and buy a kit, and they send you everything. And I can just tell you, you can trust what they say, and it is so easy. It's push together, twist to lock in. It's not like, because you know, I don't know about you, but I thought that I thought of irrigation as those little pop-up heads that people have in their lawn. Y'all, that is not what garden irrigation is. We're talking lay on the ground. You can remove it in winter if you need to, and when you redo your garden. So thinking about that and making it a part of your planning step means that you're going to get what you need and install it, because the tutorials are just great. And it makes the irrigation something, and you can even, y'all, they have timers that hook to your hose bib that turn it on once a week. My sister loves to talk about that. She actually, because of our discovery of this, she had these beautiful window boxes on her home before where she is now. And why were they so, they were like magazine quality all year round. And why was that? Because she had irrigation in them on a timer. They came on every single, the window boxes are like containers. In the summer, they have to be watered every day. That was her secret sauce. And you can do the very same thing with your garden. You can really set it up that you don't even have to think about it with a timer. I think they're like $20, the timer is. How simple is that? So you have to think about irrigation and watering, because the other thing is that, first off, irrigation is inexpensive. It uses less water. It makes your plants grow healthier and better because they aren't stressed from drought. And you get taller stems and better vegetables, right? So water is something to think about. And, the other thing that I find that's a really big piece of our success story is weed prevention. This is number 4. How are you going to prevent weeds? I've mentioned, I know, multiple times in my books that I don't even think about the flowers that I'm planting. I think about, okay, we have to build this garden. All right, let's fast forward to the very end of this story. How are we going to tear it down, and how am I going to maintain it between now and then? How are we going to prevent weeds from growing? That is my number one strategy thought. That's not most people's, but that's how I was able to survive as a flower farmer, is preventing weeds. Instead of having to deal with, there is no time to deal with weeds. The homeowner, gardener, flower farmer, we all have the same problem for different reasons, that we don't have time to deal with weeds. A farmer has way too much else to do, and a gardener has life. A garden is a hobby afterthought, right? So how do I do that? The very first thing I think about is, okay, we need to build a garden, and then we have to immediately mulch the surface to prevent all the weed seeds that I just brought to the surface to block light from getting to those weed seeds, which instantly start sprouting. And weed seeds live for decades, y'all, if not even centuries, down in our soil, deep, waiting to be brought to the surface. That's why it's like instant weed carpet. If you don't cover the ground, the good Lord will. That's what the whole purpose of this flora, these native plants, which are better known as weeds, that are ground cover. So prevention is the key. And I will mention again here, timing is everything. So by using mulch, and we use biodegradable film, love it. I've used it for close to, we figured out the other day, I'm going in my 14th year of using it. what that mulch film allows, first off, it is so much less labor to cover the soil versus organic product like bark and straw and shredded leaves, all those things, which they're all great. It's just more work, and as I'll outline here. So if I was not using biodegradable film, what we would do is build, and of course I was building by hand back then, with a tiller and a shovel and a wheelbarrow. I would make a 100-foot bed, and instead of thinking about planting it right away, the next pedal to the metal is to get the tops and the sides of that bed covered so that all the weed seeds don't immediately start germinating. Did you know that pigweed, which is amaranth, germinates in less than 12 hours? That's all it takes. That little nugget right there is what drove me to be this crazy woman about preventing weeds, because we have pigweed here. Anyway, so I make a bed, and then it's immediately getting it mulched. And if you're doing organic mulches, which I did for 10 years, it's just a lot of labor, you know, whether you're wheelbarrowing bark or bales of straw or whatever you're doing. But the other thing about organic mulches, which they build your soil, there's no question about that. But you have to make that organic mulch deep enough that it truly blocks the sun from getting to the soil surface. And that's much deeper than what most of us think. And so that means it takes a lot more mulch than you think. But bigger problem is that deep mulch is not really the best thing to plant little young seedlings into, because all the mulch has to do is shift wind, creatures, anything like that, and it'll just smother your transplant. I know, because I did that for 10 years, and I always lost plants no matter all the steps that I took. It still happened no matter what I did. So I was really primed when biodegradable film came on about in 2012. That really held up long enough to make it really useful in my garden, because think about this. You build your bed, which of course, you know, that means you're putting in compost and organic fertilizer, and you till or shovel or whatever you're doing. And then I just laid the biodegradable film. There's definitely a learning curve to laying the biodegradable film by hand. But of course, because I was building 100-foot long beds, and a lot of them season after season, I got really good at it. Practice makes perfect. Do not get frustrated and quit. There's videos on the biodegradable film product on my website showing you how, I prefer to do it by myself. It's just easier, less wind problems. You unfold it or unroll it, put weight bags down, and you do it like you're making a bed. You get it straight and you get it flat. Before you start covering anything, you use weight bags to hold it in place, because you're going to be fighting the wind. And then you cover the edges. And after you've done it a couple, 3 times, after you've done it once and then go to plant it, you're going to think, oh shoot, I shouldn't have done it this way. Things that you've done, you will do differently the next time. But that film instantly blocks the sunlight. That's why it is such a great weed suppressor. Anything that sprouts from a seed. Changed my world, y'all, because that means that I can make beds. Let's just say it's March. We don't start planting warm season tender annuals until mid-April. If it was dry enough, which it's not, sadly to say, if it was dry enough right now, we could make beds and install the film, which I have a bed maker now. I could just make beds, which means the beds are finished, and they could just sit there and wait until mid-April, because the light is not getting, nor water is getting to those beds. They're not going to grow any weeds that are sprouted from seed. You got to think about this stuff, y'all, because you know what that means? When we go to plant in mid-April, we poke our holes and plant our little soil block transplants in there. They hit the ground running. They have basically no weed pressure. It depends on the year. Sometimes we may have to whole weed, which means the weed seeds that are in the hole where you plant your plant, and you never make the holes before you're actually planting, by the way. We may have to pull a few weeds, but they are minimal, and sometimes we don't even have to do it. I'm telling you, thinking about this before you have the issue is really crazy smart. And here's the other thing that mulching does. It helps to prevent diseases. By covering the soil, when it rains, I mean, all kinds of stuff splashes up from the soil. I'll give y'all a gross example of this. And I only know this because I have a really good friend that had a stem cell transplant. Very successful, by the way. He is still living, 20 years later. He fought leukemia his entire life. And he reached a point where he could not get any more chemo or radiation. He had had so many treatments throughout his life, right? His only hope was a stem cell transplant. So he got one. And that was where it went, that time in life where it went, I think, from a bone marrow to a stem cell, that whole technology. Anyway, we got a real education. His wife was my best friend, and we got just an education, when he was going through that, none of her dogs could be, he had to live in an isolated part in the house. But what we learned is that when you flush a toilet with the top being up, you cannot imagine the airborne bacteria and things that just splash everywhere all over your bathroom. Kind of a bad scene, isn't it? But that's what happens out in your garden when it rains without mulch on the surface. It just splashes up all the spores of disease and just all kinds of bad stuff. So I thought that would be like a visual that you will never be able to let go of, y'all. That's why you need to mulch. And all of these things, less weeds, less diseases, just makes your plants grow better. And when your plants grow better, guess what? They attract less pests. Yes, pests are out there right now. I just imagine them on the tops of my trees and shrubs that are surrounding my property. They have lookouts, and what are they looking for? They are looking for stressed plants to go attack. Your stressed plants just run a flag right up the flagpole and say, come and get me. So all of that adds together. And then the last thing I want to just mention while you're thinking about planning to plant is a succession plan. And when you follow my suggested succession program, which is breaking your garden, let's just say, into 3 blocks, so that what your one block is planted in cool season hardy annuals, either in the fall and or this very early spring. The next block is your first warm season tender annual planting, first one in spring. Then the third block is your second warm season tender annual. And by the time that you fill up your third block, guess what? Your cool flower block is done. So then you can plant your fall blooming stuff down there in block number 1. By following this succession, not only spreads out the work, not only allows you to start different seeds and plant different stuff at every planting, but it spreads out the work, spreads out the harvest, and if you stick to the plan, and I'm telling you, we have a rule around here now. We do not plant in that next block unless it's that block's planting. We don't plant the extras from the block next to it that we just can't bring ourselves to throw it away. Because when you follow the plan, there is a natural crop rotation that also takes place. But this just ensures that you have enough seed starting space indoors, grow light space, energy to build the beds, energy to plant the stuff, and then it doesn't all come on at one time. And succession planting, I have worked so hard, particularly the last 3 to 4 years, to provide resources that are just making it simpler and simpler. The way I became such an expert on succession planting for my farm and my purpose was that big calendar that I used for all the years. Now the big calendar I used didn't have anything on it. It just had big blocks. So I could actually write what needed to be done when, and I figured all that out during the winter when I actually had a brain cell that wasn't overheated and exhausted. And laid out not everything we did, but the main things, like when are we supposed to plant? Oh yeah, let's back up and figure out when I'm supposed to start the seeds then. And having that visual, I have nothing against spreadsheets, y'all. There are so many technology things out there, and I look at them and they're like Chinese to me. especially because succession planting is kind of complicated if you try to look at it through that lens. When you get it down on paper, it is not at all complicated. It helps to guide you to understand and tweak and figure out. So the big calendar will definitely pulled back the curtain for me. It just exposed me to, oh, all right, here's my frost date. This is when my first warm season tender annual planting should be. Let me write that on the calendar. All right, I want to start this seed and that seed. How many weeks before that planting date do I start? You don't have to remember it. You just write it on your calendar, y'all. I'm telling you, it becomes so clear and simple that you want to say to the world, oh my gosh, y'all, it is this simple. Because people are so frustrated, and I understand. I was that person. So there's the Big Calendar Journal, so it's called a Big Calendar Journal because when you write on this calendar, it becomes the best gardening journal you have ever had because it actually has on it when you're supposed to do stuff. And then you can do all kinds of crazy things about notating when did you do it? Did you do it on time? Highlight, color, all kinds of fun stuff. And so the Big Calendar Journal is just a simplifier. Then my book, The Cut Flower Handbook, also takes you by the hand and walks you through this succession thing. But it takes you for the next step. It doesn't give you a place to write, but it talks about the different flowers that you should choose from if you want to grow a cutting garden. And then everything you need to know about all those different flowers. What stage to cut them, how to condition them. I mean, it's like the rest of the story. So if you want to grow a cutting garden, for me, if you want to have the resources that you need at hand to literally, but you have to use them, y'all. That's the key. You have to actually use them. To grow a cutting garden, the great combination is the Cut Flower Handbook and my Big Calendar Journal. And those two things together, and just commit to a couple hours a week. I mean, how much are you scrolling? I know I scroll more than 2 hours a week. To just draw a line in the sand and say, by golly, for the next 4 weeks, I'm going to take 2 hours and this is my homework. And you will not believe how it will liberate your gardening and or your farming world, because that's what it did for me. And, you know, if you're a new gardener or flower farmer, understanding these things that I just went through and implementing them will set you apart. This is how, you know, when we do our once a year farm visit where we open our farm and home to the public, or I should say that we have done. I never commit to the next year until the time comes. But anyway, people come here because they can't believe that what they see on social is really what it's like here. And they do find that that is in fact the true story. I certainly have my messes, my weedy patches. That's what I have a mower for, y'all. That's another discussion. But focusing on these things that we just talked about instead of spending hours gooing over tulips and ranunculus and just scrolling and scrolling, these are the things that matter and will change the outcome of your gardening and farming life. And I know because that's what it's done for me. And when you have a system, you know, people can't believe that it's pretty much me and Bobo. I literally only cut flowers now. I'm not really involved in I do make the beds. I don't plant. I don't get to whole weed anymore. I mean, I'm doing all these other things, right? But we have such simple systems. What I'm trying to say is this place is maintained on probably less than 20 to 25 hours of manpower out in the gardens. And it's because of the things that I've just shared with you, perfecting them, prevention, setting up healthiness to make it all happen. All right, friends, I'm going to end it there. I went much longer than I wanted to, but these are my tips to setting up any garden, but particularly a cutting garden. And, you know, we have the resources you need if that's what your journey you want it to look like. And you'll find it over at thegardenersworkshop.com. So if you are a gardener, we have an online course called the Easy Cut Flower Garden, which is about a little 3x10 cutting garden. And that, along with the Cut Flower Handbook, can really guide you to have a stellar 3x10 cutting garden that pumps out so many flowers you just won't believe it. If you're a flower farmer or a dreaming flower farmer. Flower Farming School Online, the basics is where you start. Don't go down the rabbit hole of all the things beyond. Do you know that I started out on annuals? I did go down I spent so much money, I wasted so much money is what I should say. Jumping into to high dollar crops, what we're talking about is things like tulips and ranunculus and lilies, things that you have to invest a lot to actually get an end product. Long before I had customers and knew what I was doing. So I did not make any money. I actually lost a lot of money. That's brought me back full circle to annuals, which are low investment, highest return, highest production per square foot. And that's where I've stayed for all these years. But that's where everybody should start, no matter where you think you should go. And that's what Flower Farming School, the basics, will lead you to. So friends, it's all there. We've got it. You just need to think about what it is you want to do. All right, my friends, until we meet again, ciao.